Matthew thought for a moment and didn't say anything in the end. He politely led Samantha into the living room. "Peggy, we have guests," Matthew shouted. Peggy reluctantly came out of the kitchen. She glanced at Samantha and snorted again. Then, she turned around and brought a cup of cold coffee from the kitchen. At this moment, the bell rang again. "Sorry, excuse me." Matthew had to open the door first. This time, it was indeed Sif standing outside the fence. She was no longer wearing the dark red cloak but a white dress. She was tall and had long legs. Her legs were close together and her hands were behind her back. Her smile was sweet and gave people a feeling of healing. "Good evening, Matthew." Sif smiled and greeted him. Matthew smiled back. "Good evening. Well, please come in first." As he spoke, he moved to the side. Sif took half a step forward. During this process, she suddenly turned around and looked at the alley opposite her with a helpless expression. "Wait for me, Matthew." She jogged over. In the shadows of the alley, Sif poked a section of the wall and a red blanket appeared on the wall. The blanket fell and an embarrassed middle-aged man appeared in front of her. "Father, you promised not to interfere with my freedom," said Sif angrily. Reger's face turned red and he quickly retorted, "But you also promised me that you would pay attention to your own safety." Sif's eyes widened. "But I'm going to Matthew's house. It's not a dangerous place." Reger's face was bitter. To him, that was probably the most dangerous place in Rolling Stone Town. But he didn't dare to say this to Sif. In the many arguments and conversations with his daughter, they did have an agreement. He was the first to violate the agreement. Therefore, he tried to coax Sif out of her unhappiness. "I promise you, I will leave now." Finally, Reger patted Sif's head reluctantly. Under the latter's gaze, he turned around and left the street. However, less than 5 minutes later, he turned around and sneaked into the shadows again. Detestable necromancer. Reger gritted his teeth in hatred, but it was really inconvenient for him to do anything to Matthew. He watched Sif's back and Matthew's smiling face disappear behind the door, and the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. "No. I can't just wait outside like this. I have to see what they are doing." "The living room. They're in the living room. I have to find a place where I can look into the living room." Reger's gaze frantically searched the surroundings. Very quickly, he found a red roof with a tall chimney. Reger was agile and jumped up. He took 2 steps forward and revealed a happy expression. "As expected, I can see Matthew's living room from here." However, the roof was tilted upward on both sides. If he wanted to see into Matthew's living room more clearly, he still had to go up. So he grabbed hold of the bricks and stepped forward. All the way to the roof. Suddenly, he bumped into a similarly sneaky and wild figure. That person's face was filled with unwillingness and his eyes were fierce. When Reger bumped into him, he was also staring at Matthew's living room. Reger was stunned for a moment. Then, as if he had thought of something, he instantly became furious. He grabbed the wild man's shoulder and asked, "Did the despicable necromancer get your daughter too?" Matthew's living room. Grabbed by Reger, Eli instinctively wanted to counterattack, but he restrained himself at the critical moment. His intuition told him that the man in front of him did not seem to have any malicious intentions. He frowned and pondered the meaning of Reger's question. Then, he shook his head and said, "No." Reger was a little surprised. Matthew was well known for being liked by girls. He thought that, just like him, Eli was a family member of the victim girls. "I'm sorry." Realizing that he had lost his composure, Reger let go of his hand and sighed. "I really envy you. You don't know how popular that necromancer is among the underage girls. If you have a daughter, please keep an eye on her, or you'll regret it." Eli's lips quivered slightly. "In the end," he said truthfully, "the one who just went in was my girlfriend." Reger widened his eyes. The 2 men on the roof fell into a dead silence. In Matthew's living room, the atmosphere was also a little strange at first. When 2 young women with different figures and looks appeared in a sealed space, a few meaningful eye exchanges were inevitable. Very quickly, Sif smiled sweetly. "Matthew, do you have guests? You guys go ahead. I'll go to the kitchen with Peggy." As she spoke, she actually hooked her arm around Peggy's arm with incomparable ease. The 2 of them went to the kitchen affectionately. Not long after, laughter came from the kitchen. Samantha looked away and asked curiously, "Are all human girls so bold now?" Matthew shook his head and smiled. "Sif is an exception. He poured Samantha another glass of milk. I came to look for you today because of what you said the other day. Samantha went straight to the point. At first, I didn't think that what you said was right, but your words reminded me of the past, a friend. She took a sip of milk and pressed her lips together to wipe away the white foam. Her beautiful face revealed a deep reminiscence. In fact, it has been a long time. There was someone who said something similar to me, but at that time, I was too young, and I lacked knowledge of this world. I thought about it carefully. Although you are a necromancer, you don't look like a bad person. That day in the hive, I saw you transform into a raven. That wasn't a mage's ability. That is the shape-shifting form that only druids have. No matter how bad the situation was, the goddess of moonlight would never give the title of moonwalker to someone who had nothing to do with druids. It was these thoughts that prompted me to look for you. I want to know if you can really master the abilities of both nature and immortality at the same time. Matthew smiled. Sorry, this is my secret. Samantha blushed. She seemed a little uneasy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry into your secrets. I just want to confirm one thing. Matthew crossed his hands and rested his chin on them. Why don't we talk about your friend first? He's the biggest reason why you came to find me, isn't he? He thought Samantha came to him because she was convinced by his wonderful debate. He did not expect that there was another reason. This made Matthew feel a little frustrated and curious. What kind of friend would make Samantha, an old-fashioned druid, dare to break through her shackles and come to him? Samantha was silent for a while. After a long time, she then slowly said, "All right, about my friend, I have to start from my hometown. My hometown is a village by the sea. My parents and the other adults in the village make a living by fishing. I don't have many memories of that village. I don't know why, but I was 9 or 10 years old at that time, but my memories of my hometown are so vague. I only remember that one day, all the people in the village ran out to watch some festivities. My mother pulled me along. It was on a shoal with jagged reefs. We saw a huge, magnificent, majestic, and exquisite tower ship on the shore. No matter what words I used, I couldn't express the shock I felt when I saw that ship for the first time. It was like the armor of a god, making people feel awe when they saw it. On the ship, there was a flag with golden lines on it, and the patterns on it were also very beautiful. The villagers had never seen such a flag before. Many years later, I found it in Jade Court's library. That was the flag of the Sioux country. At this point, Samantha paused and stared at Matthew with a strange look. Do you know about the Sioux country? Matthew quickly understood the emotions in Samantha's eyes. That emotion was called anticipation. Sorry, I don't know. Matthew only felt that the term Sioux country did not seem to conform to the common language habits of this continent. All right then. Samantha's eyes flashed with disappointment. Most of the people in Anger don't know much about Sioux country. After I became a druid, I went crazy looking for traces of Sioux country. I only know that the Sioux nation is on the other side of the endless ocean. If you depart from the Gem Coast, there are 3 ways to find that legendary country. If you headed north, you would cross the eternal ice field and the road of desolation. You would pass through the barren and dangerous Far East, and you would have a chance to reach the northern part of the Sioux country. First, when I visited our neighbor's house in the middle of the night, I happened to see the Lord's guards leaving through the eastern gate of the Mage District. They were fully armed, and there were about 20 of them. I'm guessing that they weren't there for a walk, Peggy said. Matthew nodded slightly. The Lord's guards were the absolute elites of the Suki family. They were independent of the garrison and only listened to Rugger's orders. Most of the time, they would not leave the camp next to the liege's residence. Only during wars or rebellions could they be seen in other parts of the town. Rugger has been keeping quiet for half a month. It seems like he's making a big move. Matthew gently kneaded the feathers at the end of the quill, and his eyes gradually became clear. It should be about the traitor. Peggy shrugged. I don't know about that. I'm just sharing interesting or suspicious signs with you, as you asked. But if your judgment is correct, then the traitor is probably not a small figure. It is very likely that he is a knight with a fief. Otherwise, Rugger would not need so many people. Matthew nodded in agreement. Although this matter is important, it has nothing to do with us. The next item is especially important. Peggy stared at Matthew seriously and said word by word, Matthew, you need to get back to work. Matthew was shocked. We don't have enough money anymore. Peggy threw a stack of bills and an account book on the table. There were all kinds of items and numbers written on them, and Matthew was dazzled. This is the account book for the last quarter and the budget for the next quarter that I just prepared. Let's talk about income first. You went out a few times recently and brought back some one-time income. These gold coins are about 700. And ever since you took a leave of absence from the Cipher Public School, Headmaster Ryan has stopped your double salary. Relying solely on the allowance from the Public Security Bureau, your monthly income is only 50 gold coins. Remember these numbers, and let's talk about expenses. In terms of food and accommodation, you have very high requirements for 3 meals a day. I prepare a variety of food for you every day, but many of the ingredients themselves are very expensive. Fortunately, the fairies would send some fresh vegetables and delicacies over every now and then. But even so, we still have to spend a lot of money in a month. Here, it's very clear. Your food expenditure is about 5 gold coins per month, and I need to buy negative energy stones to maintain my life and physical strength. Recently, I've been deliberately reducing my consumption, but it still costs around 25 gold coins per month. Look, our monthly food expenses actually cost 30 gold coins. Peggy growled and said, "This is too extravagant." Matthew pinched the bridge of his nose. It is indeed extravagant. However, the biggest expenditure is still in the greenhouse. In order to ripen a large number of seeds at the same time and cultivate them into saplings, you need to open the growth circle in the greenhouse at all times. This requires a large amount of silver powder and sunstones, and the monthly expenditure is more than 100 gold coins. This did not include the cost of buying seeds. Next, you would buy a full set of attribute enhancement scrolls. Even if that feminine mage in Bayan City is willing to give you a discount, a set will cost you 200 gold coins. I also know that you want to buy a new magic book, a new magical bag, and that ring that increases the maximum limit of your energy. However, if this continues, your savings will be exhausted within 7 months. We'll go bankrupt then. Matthew. Peggy looked very nervous and didn't feel safe at all. Matthew thought for a moment. I've also calculated the expenditure. There's one thing you might not have noticed. The main factor that caused the expenditure gap is actually the greenhouse. After this spring, I'll greatly reduce the consumption of the greenhouse. But that's still not enough, is it? Peggy stared at him, then covered her jaw with one hand and said rather exaggeratedly, "Matthew, why don't you let me go back to the negative energy plane? I don't need extra negative energy stones to survive there. Although I don't like that place, at least it can lighten your burden." Matthew looked at her speechlessly. "Or you can go back to class. You are an excellent history teacher." Peggy tried to persuade him with reason and emotion. "However, the salary given to me by the public school is only 60 gold coins a month. If we follow your calculation, we will still be unable to make ends meet." Matthew spread out his hands, indicating that he was a lazybones who did not want to go to work. "No, as far as I know, as long as you are willing to go back to class, your salary will increase to 100 gold coins a month." Peggy's plan was revealed. "So, go back to class, Matthew. This family needs your income. The girls in school are also waiting for you to come back." "Did you take Principal Ryan's money?" Peggy confessed. "Actually, this is also the third thing I want to talk about. Miss Sif came by today and said that she had something to talk to you about. I told her that you weren't here, so she planned to wait for you in the living room. I told her that you might not come back tonight." She looked a little disappointed. After sitting in the kitchen for about an hour, she left with some regret. "However, she told me that she would visit you again tomorrow at the same time." Matthew rubbed his temples. "Did you say no?" Peggy glanced at him. "I said yes." Matthew's living room. "Why?" Matthew asked. Paige crossed her arms. "Because that girl was very cute. She chatted with me for more than an hour in the kitchen and even asked me what dishes you liked. She promised me that when she came tomorrow, she would bring me the purgatory recipes hidden in her house. As a skeleton who aspires to become a top chef, of course, I couldn't refuse." Matthew was amused. "So that's why you're urging me to go to work. Was it Sif's idea? Also, is this the big thing you mentioned?" Peggy said matter-of-factly, "Going to work on time is a virtue, Matthew. Besides, this concerns my dream and your happiness. Why isn't it important? I want to remind you that Sif is different from other girls. Her mind is much more mature than you think of underage girls. I think she suits you very well." Matthew spread his hands and joked, "Unfortunately, her father does not suit me." "I thought so too," Peggy said seriously. "So I gave her a suggestion. I told her to get rid of her father, who likes to follow his daughter when she comes to find you tomorrow." Matthew scratched his head. So Reacher was following Sif again. Didn't he have his own work to do? Who knows? Peggy said. He's a pitiful person, but this kind of oppressive protection may not give Sif happiness. He should learn to let her grow up on her own. You look like you have a lot of experience with children, Matthew teased. Peggy was stunned for a moment. Her soul fire flickered again, and she didn't speak for a long time. New memories. Matthew lowered his voice. No, Peggy shook her head. But I think I heard this sentence from another person. I don't know if you've had a similar experience. A moment, a sentence, that strong feeling of déjà vu, as if you've experienced it before. Matthew nodded. The two of them were silent for a while. So, are you going back to class or not? Peggy asked suddenly. Matthew blinked. The reason why I was willing to go to class was partly because I lacked money. On the other hand, I hope to use the school library and the students' books at home to catch up on knowledge. Now that I don't need that anymore, I suggest you forget the previous suggestion. He paused for a moment and thought, but I really should find myself a legal, stable, and quick job. What do you think about that, Peggy? Peggy yawned and looked disinterested. How would I know? I'm just a muddle-headed skeleton. Good night, Matthew. The next night, Matthew, who had been busy in the forest for the whole day, returned to his home in town early. After dinner, he took a shower and waited in the living room with a book. Although the content of the book wasn't boring, Matthew was a little distracted. He was mainly thinking about how to tactfully persuade Sif not to come to him every few days. He had a good impression of Sif. Therefore, he did not want to hurt her even more. 7 p.m. It was almost time for Sif's visit. A bell rang outside the house. Matthew put down his book and quickly got up to open the door. However, what he did not expect was, it was another woman standing outside the fence. Samantha. Matthew looked at her in surprise. Please forgive me for coming in uninvited, and please don't blame Ella. I was the one who begged her to tell me your address. Samantha looked a little tired. However, there was a strange look in her eyes. At this moment, she was wearing a dress that was in line with the trend of human towns, but it did not fit her well. Her chest swelled and trembled slightly. Her expression was a little awkward. I'm not used to places where humans gather. Can you let me in? Samantha asked in a low voice. Of course. However, before Matthew could open the door to welcome her in, not far away, a mournful roar erupted. No. The man roared as he walked closer. Samantha, what are you doing? Why did you go to this necromancer's house? Matthew silently watched the menacing Eli. Look, this, he looked at Samantha again. In the next second, the uneasiness on the female druid's face instantly disappeared, replaced by anger and fierceness. Eli, I'm warning you. Do not follow me. Samantha's voice was like a beast's roar, making one's heart palpitate. She turned around and stomped towards Eli. Every step she took, her body expanded. 3 steps later, a beautiful and flawless brown fur draped over her body. She had transformed from a 1.7-meter tall human woman into a brown bear that was more than 3 meters tall. Please wait a moment, Mr. Matthew. Samantha turned around and said in a gentle and apologetic tone. You've never used that tone with me. Eli was still angrily accusing her. The giant bear pounced forward and grabbed Eli's body. It was as if she was dragging a log as she rushed out of the town. In the blink of an eye, the 2 figures disappeared one after another. Only a shallow mark was left on the cobblestone floor. 10 minutes later, a black shadow appeared at the end of the mark. It was a leopard. She lightly jumped in front of Matthew. I'm sorry, but Eli won't bother us anymore. Did that big sister with the good figure just go out through the window? Facing Sif's confusion, Matthew explained with a smile. She's a druid. Is that so? Sif placed her hands behind her back and looked a little shy. Matthew, I came here today mainly to thank you for saving my life. Matthew was stunned. Haven't you already thanked me? He was already thinking about how to reject Sif's next visit. However, in the next second, Sif quickly took out a small bag from behind her and handed it to Matthew. Last time, it was a verbal thank you. This time, I brought a gift. Sif's eyes are shining. You won't reject me, will you? Matthew stared at the luggage in his hand, unable to refuse. Magic bag, super version, 12 slots in the shortcut bar, 5 cubic meters of basic storage space, 0 weight, and increased movement speed. Additional spell, biscuit spell, can automatically generate 10 biscuits per day as food. How much is this thing? Matthew asked in a hoarse voice. 1,400 gold coins. It cost me all my pocket money that I'd saved before I was 15. Sif said frankly. But it doesn't matter. I'll be 16 soon. My father will give me a lot of pocket money again. I can't take it. It's too expensive. Matthew said with a conflicted expression. My life is worth more than 1,400 gold coins. Sif smiled and said, and I've already bought it. You know the situation in Rolling Stone Town. There aren't many mages, and no one else can use it. Matthew looked troubled. A phantom rushed into the kitchen and snatched the luggage. I'll accept it on his behalf, Peggy said loudly. Matthew glared at her. Did you tell her that I really want a better backpack? Peggy spread her hands. I said that you only wanted an enhanced version, the one that costs 500 gold coins. Who knew that she would buy the super version? Sif spread her hands. Anyway, the gift has already been given out. You can't return it back for me. As she spoke, she slumped lazily on the sofa. Matthew sighed and said, Okay. I appreciate your kindness. I really need this. Thank you, Sif. Sif blinked. Everyone wants you back in class. I am interested in history, but the books are so boring. Matthew shook his head helplessly. I really don't have time for classes recently, but if you want, I can teach you in private. Sure, Sif straightened up from the sofa. Let's start from the 100 City Division. Last time, you didn't teach me how the Seven Saint Alliance ruled the 100 City States. Matthew nodded. He returned to his room and took out a thick history book. Then, he sat in front of Sif and began to explain. Rugger, who was trying to hide in the haystack, was shocked when he heard the conversation in the living room. Is it just a lecture? At this moment, a carefree skeleton walked out of the kitchen door. Rugger curled his body. The skeleton circled around the windowsill and walked back. Fortunately, it didn't discover me. Rugger was rejoicing. Suddenly, he heard a conversation coming from the room. Matthew, I found a legal, stable, and profitable way to make money. Do tell. We can use your charm and seduce a few underage girls to come to our house for classes. Then, we can sell the sitting area around the windowsill for a high price. Huh. How do you know it won't work if you don't give it a try? Since we have a potential customer, you should go and ask. Rugger silently raised his head. Then, he met Matthew's complicated gaze. Mr. Rugger, would you buy a ticket? Matthew asked politely. The next morning. At 3:50, Matthew opened his eyes on time. After washing up, he went to the kitchen to grab a loaf of bread and left the house amidst the chirping of birds in the morning. He did not leave the mage area as usual. Instead, he walked toward the center of the mage area, where no one else had ever visited. The morning of early spring was still cold. Matthew walked past a well-maintained bush. Drops of dew swirled along the leaves, and a few drops even spilled on his shoes. A few minutes later, he wolfed down the bread and stood in front of a 2-story house in the middle of the mage area. Dong dong dong. The bell suddenly rang from the bungalow. This meant that it was 4 o'clock sharp. Matthew quickly stepped forward. He gently knocked on the door with his right hand until an exaggerated face appeared on the door. He then said the password, "A day's plan is in the morning." The strange face split open quickly, revealing a dark, dome-shaped entrance. Good morning, Matthew. Welcome to Crucible House. I'll wait for you on the top floor. Remember to press the acceleration button on the elevator a few more times. You'll experience an extraordinary pleasure. A mechanical voice came from inside. Matthew lowered his head and walked in. What appeared in front of him was an extremely vast space. The floor was paved with a strange material like mercury, the dome of the sky was lined with stars, 6 marble pillars rose into the sky, and the 2 sides were lined with sculpture like automatons. This was the Crucible House. It was part of a mage tower that the great mage Ronan had made public. Here, you could buy magic tools and materials, borrow magic books, rent magic laboratories, forge magic equipment, find an adventuring team, and so on. It was similar to the Adventurers Guild in many online games, except that the Crucible House only served mages. Moreover, the entry time was very strict. It was only 15 minutes between 4 in the morning and 4:15 in the morning. If they missed it, they would have to come back the next day. There were at least 4 entrances to the Crucible House south of Eversong Forest. However, Matthew never bumped into anyone every time he came here. He speculated that it might be because there were too few mages in this world at the moment and that the Crucible House charged an entrance fee. 30 gold coins each time wasn't too expensive, but it was still an expense. Take Matthew as an example. If he did not have the need to borrow books from this place, he would never have come to the Crucible House. The food and service here were good but expensive. The materials and tools provided by Master Ronan were much better than those outside. But if Matthew had a choice, he would rather travel a few hundred kilometers to Bayan City to find a familiar merchant to buy the same materials and tools. Unfortunately, he had no choice. This was the kind of place where one would unconsciously bend over when they entered the door if they were not rich. Matthew walked to the nearest marble pillar. This was actually a magic elevator hidden in the pillar. You could go to the floor you wanted according to your needs. Different floors had different constructs to serve you. Of course, you could also choose to have human servers receive you, but it would cost more. When Matthew approached, he was surprised to find a woman wearing black-rimmed glasses and a traditional robe waiting anxiously before the elevator. Ding! The pillar rotated to both sides, and the magic elevator appeared in front of them. "Ah, why don't you go first?" the female mage said to Matthew somewhat unnaturally. She seemed to be particularly constrained. Matthew sized her up and shook his head. "No, you go first. I'll wait for the next one." The female mage was a little surprised. However, after seeing Matthew's determined expression, she was shocked. She quickly nodded and thanked him in a low voice. Then, she jogged into the lift. By the way, if a voice asks you to press the acceleration button later, remember to reject it. The elevator doors were about to close. Matthew smiled and gave his advice. Through the crack, the female mage tilted her head in confusion. The elevator went up in an instant. Matthew waited patiently for a few minutes. A brand new elevator booth unfolded in front of him. He walked in calmly. As a close friend of Ronan, the privilege he enjoyed in the Crucible House was Tower Spirit 177 service. This would greatly facilitate him to find what he wanted in the vast sea of Amolage. There was no need to pay labor fees. Matthew was very grateful for this. The elevator doors slowly closed. He could feel himself rising at a slow and comfortable speed. After a few seconds, a stiff voice rang in his ears. "Sir, according to the current speed, you will need 29 hours and 7 minutes to reach the floor you want. So, do you need an accelerated service? I am your friendly companion, Tower Spirit number 247. Matthew immediately refused. "No, don't play this kind of trick anymore. 177, you sound like a broken record." A few seconds later, the voice continued, 177 has been killed and replaced by me, 369. Now I control the Crucible House. If you don't want to fall, you better press the acceleration button. It will make you very happy. Matthew smiled and said, "It can indeed make people very happy, but I'm sorry, I've already vomited once. After that time, I swear I won't fall for your trick again." The voice laughed coldly. "Feeling stubborn today, aren't we? Not bad, Matthew. You've grown up. You don't really think I need you to press the button to speed up the elevator, do you? I'm the greatest tower spirit in history. Who am I? King of the Crucible House. If you continue to be so impertinent, I'll personally help you speed up. I'm ready." Matthew pulled the elevator handrail. The voice of the tower genie instantly became evil and ghostly. "Are you really ready?" "Hehehe, Matthew, I'm going to speed up now." Matthew closed his eyes and tightened his grip on the armrest. "Don't be afraid. I'll be very gentle, Matthew." The tower spirit was still threatening. Matthew suddenly opened his eyes. "Are you finally afraid, Matthew?" The tower spirit was proud. Matthew let go and looked at the elevator panel. "We've arrived at the top floor. One or openu." Matthew stepped out. The top floor of the Crucible House was a large open space. Above his head was the boundless starry sky. In the open space, a golem that was more than 3 meters tall, made entirely of clay, and wearing an exaggerated suit walked toward Matthew. It didn't look angry because of the failure of the prank. Instead, it greeted Matthew with a humble tone. "Good morning, Matthew. Welcome to the Crucible House. Your humble servant, Tower Spirit 177, is at your service." However, Matthew did not dare to put on airs in front of him. One had to know that the construct in front of him had a bad personality, craved a mate, and was extremely lonely. It was also at level 23. It was said that it was the only legendary golem in the known city-state territory of the human kingdom. Matthew's strongest bone dragon was no match for its punch. "Dear Mr. 177. Matthew went straight to the point. "I want to find and borrow books from 2 different categories. Keywords. 177, who had entered his work mode, said concisely. The first keyword is psionic power. I'm looking for books and information related to charging psionic items. Matthew quickly said. The second keyword is the Sioux country. Secondary keywords may include Emperor, Great Wall and Jade Phoenix. 177 pondered for 3 seconds after listening. Then he replied. Pure psionic research books are very rare, but there are still some books related to charging psionic items. I'm not talented, but I happen to have some knowledge in the field of psionic abilities. If you can be more specific, I might be able to answer your question directly. That way, you can save a book loan fee. Matthew looked at it suspiciously. Will there be an additional consultation? He couldn't help but be careful. In the Crucible House, borrowing books was much cheaper than consulting. You worry too much, Matthew. 177 calmly said. There was originally a consultation fee, but it has been offset by the problem brought by the second keyword. Regrettably, the information related to the Sioux Nation is classified as a level 11 secret. In the entire Seven Saint Alliance, only the 4 Guardians and the other 3 Heavenly Mages are qualified to view them. If you really want to know more about this, the suggestion here is to kill Ronan, that old man, and replace him as the Guardian of the South. That way, you can do whatever you want. Matthew didn't find this particularly strange. There must be a reason why the Sioux country was rarely known on this continent. The Seven Saint Alliance definitely had their own considerations when it came to blocking this news. With his current strength, there was indeed no need to rush to gather information in this area. He sighed. So you cancelled my consultation fee out of pity. 177 said serious LV. No, I'm angry. Who am I? The greatest tower spirit in history. King of the Crucible House. I worked hard for Ronan without sleep and rest. In the end, when I went to look up information related to Sioux country just now, I was actually denied access. How dare the old men of the Alliance refuse the Crucible House? Well, those secondary keywords you mentioned earlier were pretty good. It's mine now. Refuse the request of the Crucible House's Emperor. Of course, I want to take revenge on him. Not only will the consultation fee be waived, but you'll follow me down later and take whatever you like. Don't worry. I'll support you in everything. I hope that Ronan will die in the astral world, and I, Tower Spirit 177, will become the Guardian of the South and enjoy the beauties of the world. Matthew fell silent after hearing 177's bold words. How did Ronan train the Tower Spirits? Why are you praying for his downfall? He muttered in his heart, then hurriedly changed the topic and explained the origin of the cough staff. 177 said decisively. That's simple. The grade of such psionic items is not high, and the charging method is easy. The first method is to find an existence with psionic power to act as your energy source. Then, you'll go on a stroll around the abyss. Some demons have psionic energy, but they may not know how to use psionic power. However, their power is enough for you to charge common psionic items. Here, I recommend the succubus. At least 1/3 of the succubus have a source of psionic energy in their bodies, but they almost never use it. They only know how to be in heat all day long. Considering that their physique is sturdy and durable, you can use them for many different things. At the same time, they are also a cost-effective choice. Do you want me to show you some examples? The rock golem grinned wickedly at Matthew. Matthew rubbed his temples. What about the second method? Hold your staff and imagine that you're coughing, said 177. Matthew was stunned. Is it that simple? 177 nodded. Of course, it's simple. This method is very inefficient. You need to be mentally prepared. Matthew silently noted down the 2 methods and bowed to the tower spirit to thank it before bidding farewell. Are you leaving already? 1771's tone became more lively. You know, Matthew, I'm very lonely. Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. Aren't there a lot of constructs in the Crucible House? Could it be that none of them caught your eye? He asked politely. Don't even mention those mediocre female subjects. Ronan couldn't even fathom the creation of high-level wisdom, and the constructs he created were all trash. I really wonder how he created me back then. Maybe he lied. I'm not his biological son at all. 177 said unhappily, I've expressed my needs to him many times, but what about him? There was once when I told him that my mate at least had to match my size. Do you know what he did? He caught a dinosaur for me. Matthew said in surprise, dinosaur. Do you mean it as a descriptive term? 177 took a look, shook his head and said. No, literally. He caught a F-seeking female Tyrannosaurus Rex. God knows how many wicked things he did when he participated in the revival of ancient mythical creatures project. Matthew fell silent. But that T-Rex was quite strong. The tower spirit added. What happened after that? Matthew could only force himself to continue this conversation. After that, it wasn't easy for me and Little Flower. Little Flower was the name I gave her. She wasn't very intelligent and had a bad temper, which complemented me perfectly. We had a certain degree of affection for each other, and our lives were quite fun. However, that damned Ronin turned around and took Little Flower away. He even said that there was a problem with the project and that the others in the Seven Saint Alliance had stopped it. Therefore, he had to return the test subject. 177 said bitterly. In order to make it up to me, he caught another Cyclops for me. That monster's level is almost as high as mine. The good news is that I was also interested in this new lover. Matthew nodded. I guess there must be bad news. 177 sighed and said, when I couldn't find the entrance for 3 days and 3 nights, I realized that Ronin was so careless that he got the gender of the Cyclops wrong. Matthew was stunned. The sun was high in the sky when he left the Crucible house. Matthew came to the oak forest tiredly. In the cottage, after taking a short rest, he began his work. However, when he walked to the north of the oak forest with a shovel, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. A trace on the ground had been erased. If it wasn't for the oak tree domain support, Matthew might not even have noticed this trace. Soldier. He silently woke up the blade dancer, who had been waiting in the cabin. He wanted to use his domain to communicate with the oak forest. At this moment, a few oak tree fairies flew out. They began to pour out their grievances. An ugly, fierce, and big guy came to the forest last night. And he helped you block the attack of an evil witherer. That was how you survived the invasion of the witherer. That big guy didn't go far. So he merely went into hiding. Matthew's expression changed. In the end, it became slightly gloomy. He had a rough idea of who the fairies were talking about. However, he was more concerned about the witherer. This was the druid's nemesis. They obtained power by destroying the forest. Once a forest was targeted by the witherers, it would be reduced to scorched earth. I know. Don't worry. I won't go anywhere until I deal with that witherer. Matthew said as he gripped the shovel in his hand. A moment later, he continued walking toward his plot of land. No matter what happened, planting trees was still the most important thing. At night, the moonlight shone brightly. When the first ray of moonlight shone on the world, the badge on Matthew's chest reacted. Due to your performance in killing 3 violent Zerg guards, you have become an official member of the Moonlight Society. You have obtained a spell, Moonfire. Moonfire, guide a ray of moonlight to attack the target. When it hits, it will deal fixed damage. After 15 seconds, it will continue to cause moonlight scorch damage. When you cast Moonfire under the moonlight, the damage dealt will be doubled. Moonfire could not cause any damage to golems. This spell deals an additional 100% damage to undead creatures. Matthew made a straw doll and tested the damage of Moonfire indoors and outdoors. It could only be said that it was a little sad. The double damage from the moonlight is only equivalent to a level 5 to 6 spell. Without the moonlight, it barely scratches the enemy. Although the badge had the ability to release moonlight and could deal damage in most situations, it was still too weak. Matthew was not very satisfied with this spell. One of the few advantages of Moonfire was its low mana consumption. The burning effect had a certain tactical significance, and it looked pretty. Suppressing undead creatures is also an advantage. Matthew comforted himself. In fact, he did not expect much from the spells bestowed by the goddess of moonlight. She was a god, not a mage. Her spell level might not even be as good as some 4th or 5th tier mages. The advantage of the gods was that they could use their divinity to imbue their spells. However, after the ascension of the Heavenly Palace, they were no longer able to cast divine spells on the human world. Matthew believed that this Moonfire spell should have been a divine spell created by the goddess of the moonlight. Later, the goddess had to modify it so her believers could use it. Thinking about it this way, the goddess was in quite a quandary. No wonder she was so humble. However, the goddess of moonlight's low profile may have existed since the Age of Enlightenment. Her domain is the moonlight. This means that the domain of the moon has already been taken by some other divine. Her power will be limited. Matthew rubbed his believer badge and thought casually. But Ella once mentioned that the Moonlight Woodlands had a period of glory. Could it be that she was once the goddess of the moon and not just the goddess of moonlight? However, it didn't matter. Matthew quickly walked back to the hut and politely praised the moonlight. In the following days, Matthew's focus in life returned to reality, especially planting trees. He used the extra time to search for potential witherers. Unfortunately, his divination skills were really weak. When he defined the location of the witherers, he somehow saw a woman coming out of the bath. Judging from the architectural style behind her, it was obviously a craftsman's district or a commercial district in Rolling Stone Town. However, that woman was clearly not with the witherers. Afraid of being perceived as a peeping Tom, Matthew hurriedly covered the crystal ball with sackcloth. For this period of time, he decided to stop divination. The witherer had not been found yet, but it was getting easier for Matthew to track down the whereabouts of Eli. He found a time to activate the oak tree domain. As Eli had resonated with his domain, Matthew could immediately lock onto his position as long as he was in the oak forest. From the content of Matthew's perception, Eli's daily routine was very monotonous. It looked like he seemed to be patrolling the forest very seriously. Matthew observed for a while and let him be. His forest was full of hidden talents. There were skeletons, necromancers, and corpses. What was wrong with having a proper druid? In the moonlight woodlands, Ella had repeatedly urged Matthew to continue clearing the but Matthew had always used the excuse of insufficient human power to brush her off. In fact, this reason was not completely unreasonable. He had lost so many skeleton soldiers. It would take some time for Matthew to resummon all the soldiers. Samantha never showed up again after that day. Matthew guessed that she had gone to sort out the information he wanted about the Sioux country. The mission at the hive was really not urgent. The goddess of moonlight's mission was for him to eliminate one violent Zerg guard, and Matthew had done more than that. As for the side quest of eliminating all the Zergs, Matthew had given up the idea of pushing through the quest after learning that the hive was related to the Anta Empire. It was better to do things steadily. During this period, two things happened. Matthew found some time to buy 10 air element restraining runes and a small bottle of the ghoul's nail powder from a merchant in Bayan City. These two items were prepared for the next summoning of zombies. The other thing was the transfer of Rieger's private territory to Matthew. Matthew received a free land gift document signed by the Lord from an unfamiliar city hall official. Of course, this matter absolutely could not be completed openly. Therefore, under the hint of the official, Matthew went to see Ms. Liz again, who complained that Matthew should have come to pick up the land lease document earlier. On the surface, Matthew had become the tenant of the territory. However, only a few people knew that he was actually also the landowner. Liz was very straightforward, and she even gave Matthew the promised allowance in full. When Matthew walked out of the city hall, Matthew, who had his pockets tinkling, felt that life was wonderful. He had only saved Sif once due to convenience, but the father and daughter had thanked him with generous gifts. He felt a little guilty. There was a moment when Matthew even had a wicked thought in his heart. If only this would happen again. Very quickly, he seriously banished his evil idea. I shouldn't wish for Sif to get into any more harm. The child has already suffered. Although, I wouldn't mind saving Rieger one time. Just like that. 5 days later. In the evening. In the oak forest. Matthew carried the sack and shovel and walked leisurely back to the hut. When he was less than 50 meters away from the wooden house, his domain suddenly triggered automatically. The big guy is coming. An oak tree secretly told him. Matthew turned to the west. A figure rushed over. He rushed in front of Matthew, paused for a moment, and then asked in a particularly unhappy tone, "It's fine if there are no animals in your forest, but why aren't there any berries?" Eli glared at him. Matthew thought for a moment. Maybe because this is an oak forest. Eli's dissatisfaction became even more serious. That's not what I meant. Of course, I know that this is an oak forest, but why are there only oak trees in the forest and no other plants? Matthew put down his shovel and explained in a friendly manner, "It's like this, Mr. Eli. I just started to plant this forest. I'm not a forestry expert. I only know how to plant oak trees for now." Eli revealed an incredulous expression. Then, he sneered. "It's indeed in line with my understanding of necromancers. How can there be only one kind of tree in a forest? Forget it. I don't want to talk about this with you today. You know, shapeshifters like me often need a lot of meat to replenish their energy. Of course, I have mastered many druid spells that enable my survival. For example, I have a spell that can help me fill my stomach with a small amount of berries. However, the problem is that you have nothing here. Matthew looked enlightened. He was wondering why Eli had been running around in the forest for the past few days. So he was looking for food. So, you hadn't eaten for 5 days? Matthew hurriedly asked. 4 days. Eli revealed a cold expression that showed disdain for talking to Matthew. On the 3rd day, I couldn't help but steal a chicken from the farm next door. But I can't do too much of this kind of thing, and this debt will be on you. Matthew, I'm guarding the forest for you. Guard the forest for Matthew. Matthew thought for a moment and connected the cause and effect. It seems like he wants to repay me for me bringing him into the oak domain. Matthew's opinion of Eli changed a lot. In that case, Mr. Eli, let's have a meal at my place. He sent out an invitation. I won't eat with a necromancer. I'll stay here. You can bring the food to me. Eli's attitude was still stinking and unyielding. Matthew didn't mind. In that case, I can only give you this first. The magic bag that Sif had given him just happened to produce a large batch of biscuits. Matthew handed it over. LT00K Teeny Disc 111 Tiana smelled it, Tinen Sinukel it eagerly. Matthew smiled. He turned around and went back to his room to eat. After dinner, he found that Eli was still in the same spot. Hence, he took the initiative to go over and say hello. What's wrong, Mr. Eli? Are you not full? Eli glanced at him. I'm full. Thank you. His tone was still very firm. After saying that, he glanced at Matthew's wooden house. What did you eat just now? Matthew pursed his oily lips. Just a simple meal. Is that so? I smell sausages. Eli looked at him suspiciously. Matthew changed the topic. So, the reason why you are staying in my forest is to repay me for the little help I inadvertently gave you. If that's the case, there's no need for that because it was just an accident. I only wanted to provide Samantha with domain enlightenment. You were able to comprehend it purely because of your amazing talent. When he heard Matthew mention Samantha, the veins on Eli's forehead twitched. He used a lot of strength to hold back his anger. I have a ruler in my heart. I won't leave until I pay back what I owe you. Don't underestimate me. We, druids, are the true kings of the jungle. If I didn't guard the forest for you, these oak trees would have been destroyed by the evil witherers. Matthew laughed. He wanted to tell Eli that he didn't owe him anything. However, Matthew swallowed his words when he saw the proud face of Eli. Hence, he nodded and said, if you want to stay, of course, you can. Please do as you please. I'll get someone to prepare a portion of food for you. As he spoke, he took out a pen and paper, seemingly preparing to record. The corner of Eli's mouth twitched. No need. The biscuits just now will do. Matthew chuckled. Biscuit or sausage? Eli hesitated for a moment. Sausage then. Do you want anything else? For example, drinks? Matthew asked again. Eli shook his head decisively. No need. Milk or coffee? Matthew did not seem to hear him. Milk, Eli answered awkwardly. Then, from tomorrow morning onwards, you can come here to find me before I start planting trees. I will give you the food for that day. Matthew lowered his head and scribbled a few lines. He looked at his serious expression. A thought suddenly came to Eli's mind. Does he treat his employees so well all the time? No, damn it. I'm not an employee of this necromancer. He raised his head fiercely. However, he was shocked to find that Matthew had already left. Night fell and everything was silent. Matthew, who had finished his meditation for the day, pushed open the door and walked out. The moonlight was bright outside. Eli was sitting under an oak tree not far away, staring blankly at the moon. Matthew did not greet him. He walked straight to the northwest. However, very quickly, footsteps came from behind him. What are you going to do in the middle of the night? Necromancer. Eli asked from behind. It's a private matter. Matthew replied concisely, you'd better not follow me. As soon as he said that, Eli seemed even more interested. He quickly caught up with Matthew. What bad things are you hiding from? Matthew glanced at him. It's not that I need to hide anything from you. I just feel that summoning a zombie in front of a druid would be a little blasphemous. You've already done more blasphemous things to Samantha. Then, he realized what Matthew was about to do. How dare you summon zombies in the oak forest? The anger in the corner of Eli's eyes was about to fill up again. This is the domain of nature, a sacred land that cannot be defiled. Matthew replied slowly, if this counts as defiling, then nature has almost been ruined by me. Eli's temples were throbbing. He suppressed his anger and looked at Matthew. Then aren't you afraid that I'll destroy your evil ritual? Matthew looked at him meaningfully. This is my domain. You'd better not do anything stupid, Eli. As he spoke, he walked to the skeleton dorm. He pulled open the cover. He began to transport the corpses outside. Eli watched this scene with a gloomy expression. He knew that even though Matthew looked like he was only at Tier 2, with the support of the Oak Tree territory, he did not have much chance of winning. If he wanted to launch a sneak attack, Matthew could activate his domain immediately. The repulsive force of the domain would provide him with enough room to maneuver. After the domain was activated, not only would Matthew be buffed, but as a druid, Eli would also be weakened by the changes in the environment. This was the power of a domain. Not to mention, this necromancer in front of him obviously had many hidden cards. These days in the forest. It wasn't the first time that Eli had felt killing intent from Matthew. It was a pressure that only a rogue of at least Tier 3 could give it to him. I won't interfere with your ritual, but I want to witness the birth of evil with my own eyes. After I repay you, I will destroy all the evil creatures you summon, said Eli grimly. Matthew ignored him. He placed the bodies of the 5 arsonists in a row in the open space under the moonlight. He didn't explain himself. However, necromancers generally believed that summoning zombies under sufficient moonlight would be easier, and there was also a chance of producing high-quality zombies. Matthew would rather believe it than not. He quickly sprinkled a handful of corpse powder and a small amount of ghoul's nail powder evenly on each corpse. He then equipped them with the air element concealing rune that he had purchased previously. After doing all this, Matthew began a long chant. Undead summoning took a long time to cast, but even for the slowest necromancer, it would only take about 5 minutes at most. However, Matthew took 12 minutes to cast it. The reason was simple. At first, he was just fooling around. Although he was willing to believe in Eli's character, he had to be extra careful at this critical moment. It was not until Eli squatted down impatiently that Matthew began to summon the undead. In the forest, the necromancer's chanting was rhythmic. Dark clouds floated by. Eli's face flickered. Suddenly, one of the corpses stood up stiffly. Immediately after, corpses crawled up from the ground one after another. Eli subconsciously jumped up from the ground. But in the next second, he was surprised to sense that the oak forest around him seemed to have come alive. The night wind blew. Wisps of green light appeared on the oak trees. In the end, it merged into the bodies of the 5 zombies. This scene also shocked Matthew. He couldn't help but look at the record panel. Hint, you have successfully completed the summoning of the undead, first time /zombie. You received 5 undead creatures, zombie/average level 7. Your zombies were blessed by the oak tree domain when they were born. They received the bark spell. Bark spell, passive, your zombie skin will automatically form a layer of tough ancient tree skin, armor +3, and the tree skin will provide a certain amount of damage reduction when they receive damage. Zombies that knew the bark spell. Matthew was stunned. He wanted to take a closer look at the data of his zombie followers. At this moment, another change occurred. A strong ray of moonlight shone down. The 5 zombies were bathed in the moonlight. Their bodies seemed to have started a wonderful transformation. This unique moonlight lasted for 15 seconds. After the light dissipated, both Eli and Matthew were shocked. A layer of silver-gray light flowed on the bodies of the 5 zombies. The glow appeared once every 6 seconds. Although it was fleeting, it gave people a sacred feeling. Zombies blessed by the moonlight. I must be crazy. Eli rubbed his eyes desperately. However, nothing changed. On the other side, Matthew also received the latest notification. Your zombies were blessed by the goddess of moonlight at the beginning of their birth. They received level increase, holy moon armor and moonlight power. Your zombies have evolved into silver moon zombies. Your undead summoning zombies has new abilities. Level increase, your zombies average level increased by 1 level, current level. Holy moon armor, under the moonlight, your zombie will receive a layer of holy moonlight armor, armor +1, and possess a minor transcendent, holy temperament, charm +1/1, intimidation +10. Before the holy moon armor is broken, your zombies will not receive additional damage from spells or items that restrain undead creatures. Moonlight power, under the moonlight, your zombies have strength +1. Movement speed +50%. Silver moon zombie. Did the goddess of moonlight take over the naming rights? Matthew grumbled in his heart. The Silver Moon zombies were obviously stronger than normal zombies. However, what he was more concerned about was the goddess of moonlight's constant buffs. A goddess who was once high and mighty had repeatedly shown goodwill to a mortal. Either the goddess had discerned that Matthew's future achievements were limitless and had come to curry favor with him in advance, or she was in a precarious situation. Matthew guessed it was the latter. First, she struck Ella with lightning. Then, she gave me a badge and a blessings. Now, even MV zombie underlings have gotten a share of the benefits. This is definitely not something that can be gained by killing a few wild Zerg guards. However, Matthew was not worried about the goddess making any unreasonable requests. After all, the initiative was in his hands now. Hiss. A Silver Moon zombie suddenly raised its head. It was facing the moon, and wisps of white gas were spewing out from its half-rotten lips and teeth. Coupled with its yellow teeth and the sores on its neck, it looked especially evil and strange. Matthew walked over to take a closer look, his eyes constantly revealing a satisfied expression. Zombies and skeletons might be undead creatures of the same level in the eyes of ordinary people. However, in the eyes of the necromancer, the difference between the two could not be clearer. Zombies were much stronger than skeletons. One should not underestimate the dozens of pounds of rotten meat that zombies had more than skeletons. It was this rotten meat that gave zombies stronger characteristics. First was the level. Skeleton soldiers were mostly between levels 3 and 4. Meanwhile, the zombies were at least level 5, and Matthew's Silver Moon zombies were at level 8. The second was zombies' defensive ability. It was common knowledge that skeleton soldiers had basically zero defense. When they were attacked, they had no shield. Therefore, except for a few mutants, most skeletons, even if they were of a high level, would easily fall into the predicament of being shattered by a single touch. Zombies were different. Their speciality was their thick skin. The undead's characteristics and the buffer effect of rotten meat gave ordinary zombies a defensive ability that skeletons lacked. As for the Silver Moon zombies, they were even stronger. Lastly, it was the attack ability. Skeleton soldiers had high attack power, but zombies had even higher attack power. Most zombies were born with the following two attributes. Unlimited strength. Zombie strength will not be lower than 15 points. Paralysis poison. During a battle with a zombie, living enemies will be paralyzed once every 30 seconds. Once the immunity roll fails, they may enter a paralyzed state for 3 to 5 seconds. The true weakness of zombies was their movement speed and attack speed. The speed at which they raised their hands and walked was so slow that their enemies could easily walk away. If a normal person's movement speed was 10, then the skeleton soldiers was 7, and the zombies were only 4. The slow movement and attack speed were the reasons why necromancers didn't like zombies. But the Silver Moon zombie was different. Thanks to the moonlight power, the silver zombies could move around 6 points under the moon. Although it was still not fast, it was much faster than normal. At the same time, the increase in strength and the existence of the paralyzing poison also allowed the zombies to control their enemies better. I can learn 1 or 2 crowd control spells. The level 5 spell Frost Path is not bad. It can work with zombies to kill the target. Matthew was in a good mood as he wandered around the zombies. He didn't even care that Eli's mind was about to explode. After getting familiar with the attributes and abilities of the zombie, Matthew's physical examination was ready to come to an end. It was a pity. None of the 5 zombies were elite zombies. According to Scarface's performance when he was alive, Matthew thought that he would become an elite, but who knew that he was only a normal zombie? However, the zombie that had been transformed from Scarface was indeed the tallest, largest, and strongest among them. To make it easier to remember, Matthew named it the Big Zombie. The remaining 4 sat in a row according to their physiques. Naturally, they were named Zombies 2 to 5. Matthew was already very fond of his zombie underlings. After the naming was completed, Matthew began to drive the Silver Moon zombies around the oak forest. He had to arrange accommodation for his new employees. The skeleton dormitory definitely wouldn't do. Although zombies and skeletons were both undead creatures, they were born to be enemies. If no one controlled them, a war would definitely break out between the two. Matthew did not want that to happen. He walked around the forest. In the end, he found a similar hole about 200 meters away from the skeleton dormitory. The tunnel was one way. It looked dark, narrow, and deep. Matthew ordered the zombies to jump down one by one. They did exactly as he said. I can stuff another 5. Tomorrow, I'll find a carpenter to get a few boards to cover the hole. From now on, this is the zombie dormitory. Matthew was about to leave. At this moment, Eli, who had been tailing them all the way, finally couldn't take it anymore. He asked angrily. Are you hiding the zombies here? Matthew spread his hands. Isn't that clear? Eli was even angrier. If not for his strong sense of principle, he really wanted to throw himself at the necromancer and scratch his handsome face. Since you like to mix undead creatures with nature so much, why don't you build a few new cemeteries in the forest? He mocked. Matthew's eyes lit up. He pondered for a few seconds. He pressed his hands on both sides of Eli's shoulders and praised sincerely, "You're really a genius. I should have thought of it earlier." Matthew praised Eli several times. Only then did he let go of his hand and turn to leave. Wait. Eli suddenly felt something was wrong. What do you mean? I agree with you about a cemetery. If we build a super large cemetery in the oak forest, it might become a city of the undead in the future. Matthew's mind was filled with longing for the future. In the past, his attention on undead creatures was limited to some special targets, mainly Peggy, Filey and Soldier. He was limited by energy and negligence. He really did not think of building a real cemetery for the undead creatures to live in. This would not only greatly increase the loyalty of the employees, but there were also many other benefits. The cost of building a cemetery was not low. However, Matthew had already decided to build the cemetery in a hole under the forest. At this moment, the empty underground city in the Gold Digger Basin became the perfect graveyard. The undead rested underground. The oak tree grew above ground. What a beautiful and harmonious scene. Matthew decided to go back and discuss it with Peggy. If they wanted to build a cemetery, the opinion of the torn skeleton was undoubtedly the most important. His mind was filled with the enthusiasm to build a cemetery. Matthew returned to the cabin and was about to record his inspiration when a tall shadow appeared outside the window of the cabin. Peggy. Matthew looked at her in surprise, and his eyes gradually became nervous. What happened? In his agreement with Peggy, only when something urgent happened would she leave home and come to the forest to look for Matthew. Peggy said seriously. Matthew, a young man who is 10 times more beautiful than you found me. He said that he wanted to redeem me and let me go with him in the future. With the relationship between you and me, how could I agree? But he gave me a raise, so I thought I had to tell you before I eloped with him, so I came to you. Matthew rolled his eyes, his nervousness gone. Stop joking. Get to the point, Peggy. He said. Peggy shrugged. All right. There was a beautiful young man who came to our house today, but he came to look for you. I said you weren't there. He said he would come back tomorrow at the same time. He has something important to discuss with you. Matthew asked incredulously, did you come all the way here just for this? This doesn't suit your personality. Peggy said shyly, because of that beautiful young man, I hope that you receive this news as soon as possible. He even praised me for my temperament. Matthew was even more in disbelief. He didn't give you any other benefits. Peggy said unhappily, am I the kind of person who will accept random benefits? Could it not be due to love? To be honest, Matthew, the moment I saw that young man for the 3rd time, I already thought of where to elope with him. Matthew rubbed his temples and suddenly said, I know who our mysterious guest is. Peggy said in surprise, have you guessed it? I was just about to tell you his identity, origin, and name. Zeller. Matthew shrugged. The warlock from the Lord's mansion, the one who is inseparable from Rieger most of the time. In the entire Rolling Stone town, only he can be more handsome than me. He saw that Peggy was still smitten after nodding her head. Matthew couldn't help but tease, with his charm, who knows how many women he has fooled. You are not his match, Peggy. Who knew that Peggy actually replied very quickly, who knows? How many men have fooled around with a skeleton torn before? Maybe he will find it fresh. Matthew was at a loss for words and could not find an angle to refute. After all, there was a high chance Zeller had never fooled around with a skeleton torn before. 8 p.m. the next day. Matthew's living room. Coffee or milk? There's wine too, but they're all very bland. Facing Matthew's hospitality, Zeller casually put one thigh on the other Emmy. He had a confident and charming smile on his face. Thank you, just water will do. He was sitting comfortably on the sofa. It was completely different from the tension that many guests felt when they first visited. Every detail of Zeller's body showed that he was very relaxed. Tonight, he was wearing a thin purple short trench coat. With the black inner lining and long pants, the white belt was particularly eye-catching. In the middle of the belt was a silver circle, and the pattern on it changed constantly. Goat horn rainbow, blade willow leaf, girl, farm bull, book, killer. Hanging on the right side of the belt were a few cute frog dolls. They looked vivid and lifelike. Matthew noticed this when he first entered the door. He couldn't help but take a few more glances. He had to admit, Zeller's handsomeness was from the inside out. If his appearance could only be considered above average, then his inner charm could drive most intelligent creatures crazy. This was a warlock. He was a professional charmer. This kind of charm ability feels just a little worse than Lulu's. Matthew was secretly shocked. On the other side, the attentive Peggy had already brought up the water that Zeller had ordered. However, Matthew felt his scalp go numb with just a glance. Peggy, why did you bring out the entire water tank from the kitchen? Peggy glared at him. What? I'm afraid that Zeller won't have enough to drink. Matthew was speechless. Peggy was indeed a mutant among mutants. Logically speaking, undead creatures were immune to charm, but she seemed to be mesmerized. But even so, Matthew still felt that she was acting. Are you that eager for a pay raise? Did I really give too little? He even thought of this. A small quarrel broke out between the master and servant. Zeller did not mind. He magically took out an empty bottle from his sleeve and filled it with water. Then, he used the same trick and grabbed a few pieces of ginger to sprinkle them into the cup. Ever since I awakened at the age of 13, I only drank this. Zeller explained with a smile. Matthew responded and finally thought of a way to send Peggy away. It was not until the figure of the Tauren completely disappeared in front of the two that Zeller suddenly sighed. It's because of this that I don't want to go out and meet people. As he spoke, his eyes darted around Matthew's body teasingly. Mr. Matthew, other than Rieger, you were the first person to ignore my charm when you first met me completely. This is very impressive. Matthew waved his hand. Your overpraisins me. Your charm leaves a deep impression on me. Speaking of which, is there no way to restrain your charm? Zeller took a sip of cold ginger water. Yes. But I'm already in a state where I'm trying my best to restrain my charm. Matthew was silent. Charm that doesn't match one's strength is often the root of trouble. Zeller continued, I still remember that when I was 13 years old, I was sold to a big noble with a vast territory because I was too beautiful. That big-bellied middle-aged man kept saying that he wanted to take me as his adopted son. In the first week, he did a good job on the surface. He found someone to teach me how to read, taught me etiquette, and even bought me a pony to ride on. I was really happy at that time. I thought I had met a good person. That was until the day he undid his belt when we were alone in the room. He asked me to help him do it. Matthew couldn't help but ask, and then? Zeller smiled and said, then I awakened and became a warlock. Of course, this is the simplified version. In fact, there are a lot of complicated contents in the middle, but they can't be explained in a few words. Regardless, that's not the reason why I came to visit you today. Matthew nodded. Please speak. First of all, I want to thank you on behalf of Sif. I watched this child grow up. If anything happened to her that night, I would be very sad. Zeller said as he solemnly untied a frog doll hanging from his belt. He handed it to Matthew. A small gift. Please accept it. It might bring you luck. Matthew hesitated. In the end, he still took it. He rolled the doll in his palm and did not find anything unusual. So even you know the truth? Matthew asked casually. Zeller smiled gently. No one will really believe Blake's story about the necromancer of Bayan City, right? Matthew coughed twice. However, it was Rieger who told me the true identity of that necromancer. Zeller added. In the next second, his expression turned serious. In that incident, the people who died at your hands belonged to the Order of Calamity, a newly rising evil organization. According to our latest intelligence, the Order of Calamity has no intention of stopping. They are recruiting more people to harass Rolling Stone Town. Their primary target is you. Like and subscribe.